Well, welcome. We're so excited that you are here with us again this Friday for Go Live for Equity. My name is Margaret Mitchell, and I'm President and CEO for the YWCA in Greater Cleveland. And it really is an honor and a privilege to be with you all this morning. I wanted to just do a brief recap of last week. It was an amazing discussion. We had a conversation that looked at the systematic digital divide that is happening as a result of COVID-19, and of course, deeply impacting our education system here in Cleveland. We had amazing panelists. We had Pam Donaldson with us from Facing History. We had technologist Adam King, and of course we had we had Habiba Grimes with PEP, and it was an amazing conversation. You can still see that on YouTube if you'd like to go back and share that. And today we are going to have a conversation around criminal justice. Criminal justice was a week that we had for our 21-day challenge. We did look at criminal justice in the United States. We took a deep dive in understanding what's happening in Ohio. We looked at some history, racial profiling, and the experience of women in prison. Our 21-day challenge is still available for you all to be able to take. It is on our website. In March of this year, we had over 3,500 individuals who took the challenge with us for 21 days, daily taking a deep dive in as we looked at voting and the census, education, criminal justice, and of course, public health. And of course, all of those issues have become even more relevant in the era of COVID, which is the season we are in now. And so we're going to get started with our discussion around criminal justice. And with us today is Brashira Addison. And Brashira has spent the past 4 years serving as the senior manager of policy and strategic initiatives for Towards Employment. Towards Employment is a 40-plus-year-old organization working in the workforce development space. They do amazing work, really supporting individuals, nearly 600 every single year, to gain full-time employment. Many, if not most, of those that they are serving have been incarcerated and have a history of incarceration. She also had a significant role on the Issue 1 campaign, and so we're going to be able to talk with her about Issue 1 and just the nonviolent move to decriminalize individuals who had low-level violations. So I look forward to that conversation. She continues her work with so many local policies, and I consider her an expert in this space. And another expert joining us this morning is Jasmine Ayers. Jasmine is new to Policy Matters Ohio, which is an organization focused on policy at a state level. She is the policy liaison for Policy Matters Ohio. She works to connect groups and policies together. Policy Matters, if you have not been aware of them or visited their website, the individuals, the leadership there, and Jasmine are a wealth of information that you are going to need to be able to have the depth of knowledge around so many issues affecting Ohioans. She was an outreach specialist for Huckleberry House in Columbus, and I have a very unique connection to the first Huckleberry House in San Francisco. My parents were married by Edward Beggs, who was one of the founders and the first executive director of Huckleberry House, which is essentially really became a shelter and a refuge for runaways, and Huckleberry House was one of the very first models in the country around youth development. Jasmine is also, so I love that, Jasmine, that we have that Huckleberry House connection.
Thank you. It was a fantastic, fantastic place.
It's amazing, just special and magical. She also has a lot of experience in community development, serving as the community development officer for Community of Caring Development Foundation, which was linked to the New Salem Baptist Church, where she has been a member and involved since she was the age of 4. So thank you, another sister. And so we're going to jump right in to our conversation. And clearly, COVID-19 has pushed criminal justice reform to the front of the line. We are talking about criminal justice again. So much happening, of course, tragically in the news, but criminal justice reform is also having headlines. And so this is such an important time for us to be able to talk about criminal justice. I want to just sort of jump out and hear from both of you in terms of how the criminal justice reform and COVID-19 has been able to be such an urgent topic for us presently. Who wants to get us started?
I can jump in. This is Bashara. And thank you so much, Margaret and the YWCA team, for letting me join and be a part of this discussion. I really appreciate it, and Towards Employment does too. I think just to get us started, I think there's the criminal justice system is incredibly complex. And so where we have seen a lot of activity around the criminal justice system is both from what is happening inside prisons and the fact that it's very easy for the coronavirus to spread inside a closed-in institution where it's literally impossible to do social distancing. And we know that one of the prisons in Ohio actually had the largest concentration of cases of the coronavirus in the country for a period of time. So that's not a good statistic. That's not something we want to be number one for. At the same time, when we look at kind of the front end of the criminal justice system, when individuals are being processed, whether they are, they've been charged, they might be in jail awaiting trial, they may be figuring out how to post bail, we notice, not consistently across the state, but local communities were finding ways to release individuals and not have them incarcerated in the jail facility, and making a distinction between a jail and a prison, because those are two different things. And so on the front end of the system, they were able to make changes to how they were processing individuals and making it possible for, nonviolent low-level offenses to just be released, or, you're paying a fine, or you're on probation, but you're not actually incarcerating someone. They were able to do that without legislation, which means that it's a local decision. Now, of course, everyone was talking about it. There's been guidance from the Ohio Supreme Court. So we were in an environment where it was easier to make those kinds of decisions, and there was an emergency, and, protecting public safety. It was important to figure out how to do that. But it was something that was a local decision, did not need legislation. So that's what's important, is that this is the kind of decision that we could have had for a long time, because it just shows what our potential and capabilities are. On the prison side, it just goes to show that we have an environment that is potentially unsafe, both for the inmates and for the individuals who are working in the facilities. So from a public health perspective, we need to figure out a way to address that problem. At the same time, from and just looking at the policy around incarceration, we have facilities that are so full, it's impossible to actually implement public health and public safety guidelines. So we have to also think about how we go about addressing that, not just right now, but for the long term.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. I think I have some numbers here. I think there's 3 correctional facilities, Marion, Pickaway, and Belmont, and each of them are over 140% of capacity. So like even under the best situation, having people in a confined space would be a problem. But in many of our prisons, they're overcrowded, sort of in addition to everybody being close to each other, and it just greatly sort of exacerbates the problem. And it it is a racial issue. So we're about 12, Black people are about 12% of the population, and for men they're about 47% of Ohio prisons, and for women they're about 74%, and for youth they're about 53%. And our corrections officers, Black officers make up about 18% of corrections officers. So in all of those sort of areas in which people are interacting with the criminal justice system, African Americans are overrepresented. And so not only sort of are we at more risk to contract the virus, but also it's just, unfortunately, we tend to have more health problems. And that is sort of one of the things that is also a contributing factor to the severity of the disease. So it's just sort of on all levels. We are sounding the alarm and sort of ringing the sirens on this stuff, because it's, um, when you layer all of those problems on top of each other, you get what Bashir says, where you have a hot spot that is the largest concentration of COVID in the country. And so we just want to make sure that we're advocating for the folks in there. And we also know that Ohio has an aging incarcerated population. So about a fifth of the people who are incarcerated are 50 or older.
Wow.
And about 10,000 people who are in there for violations of parole or probation. So they didn't get a job in time, or they were late to check in with their parole officer. And so we have a lot of people who are not there for serious crimes, or who are in the demographic that are particularly vulnerable to this disease, that we absolutely could let out. And we know that some places, some local jails have taken the step to do that. In Cuyahoga County, they released a significant amount of people. And, like the news will tell you, these, you let people out and crime goes up, and this seems to not be the case. So we have lots of room to sort of decarcerate our facilities.
When you mentioned that percentage, was it 10, 15% who are in prison due to probation violations? I think there's also a even larger percentage in prison for what would be considered, low level, drug offenses. And we certainly see sort of the decriminalization of, drugs coming our way. Some states have already gotten there. What impact, what is the percentage of sort of the low level, the probation plus low level offenses? And what is this, the decriminalization, which isn't here yet, but certainly on its way? What is that, going to have an effect?
So I'll jump in again. If I could share my screen for a moment, I just want to show a graphic. Let's see if I can make this work. And let's see, from current slide. Okay, so one of the things that you're speaking to is, low-level drug-related offenses for those who are incarcerated. We have a significant share of those incarcerated who are incarcerated for those kinds of offenses. So there's definitely some race disparities along those lines. So one, we want to get at like usage rates, and we know that that the usage rates between Blacks and whites of marijuana is about the same, but Blacks are arrested for marijuana possession at nearly 4 times the rate of those who are white. And so we know that individuals there was a national survey that showed we use drugs similar rates, but we definitely incarcerate and arrest individuals differently along racial lines. And those that are serving time for drug offenses, 60% of those individuals are Black. And as Jasmine stated, between 12 to 13% of those incarcerated, or 12 to 13% of our Ohio's population is Black. So we definitely will see a race disparity here. And this is something that Towards Employment looks at, not just from a policy lens, but then we also look at what does that mean in the community. So we serve individuals who have already served their time. They're coming to us because they're looking to get a second chance or another start. And we found that about a third of those that we serve that have criminal records, those individuals are with us because they have a drug-related offense. At the same time, we look back, and this is 2018 data, 94 of our participants who did not identified that addiction was a barrier for them or a challenge in being able to successfully re-enter, but only 35 of those individuals actually had drug-related offenses. So when we start looking at how does drug-related policy as it relates to the criminal justice system, it's incredibly complex. There's definitely racial disparities. Individuals get treated differently in the system. And we know that addiction is often a driver for individuals being in the system, and they may not have a drug-related offense, but addiction was what was driving whatever criminal activity they were involved in. And the system doesn't make any distinctions around those individuals, which creates a system where we have individuals who have low-level offenses that probably don't need to be incarcerated, and individuals that might have more serious offenses, but actually really need addiction and treatment support, which means incarceration actually isn't the right tool or the right mechanism to actually get someone on a path towards stability.
Absolutely. And I don't want to sort of get ahead of myself because I know we were going to talk about the issue 1 stuff. So if you don't mind, I'm going to talk about the SB3 stuff, and then maybe we can pivot back about how the journey that we had to take to sort of to get to that.
Sounds good.
So, cool. There's some pending legislation right now that was introduced a while ago that would reclassify low-level drug possession charges from felonies to misdemeanors. And I mean, this means a whole range of things for people, right? Like once you have a felony, any sort of like assistance with public housing, even regular housing, jobs, getting student loans, it just becomes a tremendous barrier that just sort of follows you through life. And we know that a lot of times these low-level drug possessions are really people who are addicted. And so if we are able to reclassify this through the SB through Senate Bill 3, we believe that we would save $226 million a year. And that's $226 million that we can then invest in the community for treatment, for education, for folks reentering. And so there are things that we can do that are pending to sort of be supportive of decarceration. So yeah, I just sort of wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, and I can jump in, Jasmine. Thank you for raising Senate Bill 3, because there's actually been some slight movement around Senate Bill 3 in the last couple weeks. It looks like there's a chance the Senate Judiciary Committee will have a chance to vote on Senate Bill 3. And if anyone knows anything about how policy is made slow. So we have a bill that has been heard in one chamber of our Ohio House, and it will have to go to another chamber. So the Senate is getting ready to consider voting this particular bill that would reclassify felony 4 and 5 drug possession offenses as misdemeanors, which will give the Senate a chance to vote on it. Then it has to go to the House, and we have to go through the same process over again. It's not a perfect bill. We know that amendments have been made to this bill that were recommended amendments in December. To my knowledge, although I am very, and I think Towards Employment is supportive of the passage of this bill, the current language does not actually benefit anybody that Towards Employment serves. And I got to raise that. It is not retroactive, which means that those who have already served their time for a felony 4 or 5 drug possession offense who are living in the community with that felony, who face the multitude of collateral sanctions. And Jasmine, I hope you can speak to the Policy Matters report on collateral sanctions that individuals face when they're looking for employment. Those individuals will not benefit from this bill as the language currently stands. And
Is
Senate
it
bill,
possible to get that pushed in? I mean, is it too late in your opinion? I mean, how would we get that pushed in? Or could that potentially come with another Senate bill?
so I don't think it's too late because it is only in one phase of the process. The
Mhm.
Ohio House, so our House of Representatives, haven't had a chance to debate the bill yet. And so, and I know one of the things that we want to be able to take away from this series, Go Live for Equity, is
Yeah.
what are your next steps? Well, right now, there is an opportunity to address an issue that has dramatically impacted Brown and Black people in the city of Cleveland. And the opportunity that's in front of us is missing a piece. Now, even if this piece doesn't get slipped in, overall, I think we still need to have movement on decarceration and the decriminalization of drugs. And so even if we don't get everything we want, Senate Bill 3 is still directionally correct, even if it doesn't go far enough. But yes,
I like that phrase, directionally correct. Thank you. I'm gonna
yes,
have to use that.
That's
Um,
good.
yeah, I could talk about a little bit about sort of like the collateral sanctions. And so one of my colleagues, Michael Shields, has done a lot of work around this. And so there are about 850 laws and administrative rules that limit job opportunities for Ohioans with convictions who have already served their time. And around 1 in 4 Ohio jobs is blocked or restricted for those with a conviction. So there are just a number of jobs that are just taken completely out of the pool for people who have a record. And they say that jobs affected by collateral sanctions, so those jobs that are sort of unavailable to people, pay on average $4,700 more than the jobs that they're actually able to have to be accessible. Um, so, and we're removing people from the economy. We are removing them from their family. I think treatment is a much better solution to someone who has a drug problem because treatment still allows them to be with their loved ones. It still allows them, hopefully, to eventually hold down a job so that they can be there for their family and support them. And so the collateral sanctions piece is just a big problem, especially folks who uh, you get better and you get some job training while you're there, and you get out and you want to go back to school and you can't get a student loan. And so we are making it unbelievably hard for people who have decided that they want to pursue a career or want to better themselves. And we should be encouraging people to do that. We shouldn't be putting up barriers and roadblocks for them.
yeah. And if I could screen share one more time,
Sure.
I would like to show what an experience looks like for someone who is reentering, where drug possession is one of their barriers.
Okay.
So let's see if I can do this with my tech savvy. do from current slide, if it'll allow me. Not that one. There we go. I can't take credit for this graphic. My development director at Towards Employment actually made this from some scratch notes I had put together in collaboration with our director of legal. Individuals who are battling addiction come in and out of the system. And so this is a graphic that actually represents one of our participants we were serving in 2018. They clearly were someone that, were battling addiction, starting with prescription pain medication. They picked up a number of offenses, low-level offenses in 2015 and 2017. They picked up more serious drug-related offenses in 2018 that led to their arrest, that individual going to jail. They were arraigned, they had a court hearing, and they were able to post bond. So this individual is a young white woman. So when I look at this kind of post bond element of the graphic, not everyone who is, in this situation actually can post bond. And that gets into a whole nother set of criminal justice issues around bail reform, fees and fines, and how we criminalize people. But that was not her situation. She had a family that was able to post bond. She was sentenced, and she ended up spending 9 months for her felony 3 at the Northeast Ohio Reintegration Center, which is a facility for women. She was on 2 years probation. She had a driver's license suspension that was 6 months that was automatic, and then 3 years discretionary. She was also on 2 years of probation, came to Towards Employment, and this gets to the collateral piece. These are all the things that she had to deal with post-incarceration. So one, retake her driving course. She's gonna have to have higher risk, more expensive insurance. She had to apply for discretionary driving privileges. And then at the bottom, you'll see she faces about 524 ways in which the state has laws that says because you're convicted of X criminal conviction, you are now precluded from X types of jobs or benefits as a result. And so when you can imagine someone who does not have a support system, who doesn't have any resources or money, who might not be technology savvy in this, COVID-19 environment world we're living in, this is a lot for someone to handle and to untangle as they are trying to get back on their feet. And you can imagine that let's say you don't have a support system, you don't have someone giving you legal guidance on how to apply for all of these things, someone who's guiding you towards the kinds of jobs that you will have access to. What do you think will happen to that individual? And what's likely is that they will reoffend, which doesn't do anyone a service. It doesn't help that individual because often I call them crimes of poverty. Individuals are just desperate and they end up falling back into the system. It doesn't actually help the system because it's expensive. It's not a good use of public dollars, and it's a public safety issue because if someone's reoffending, that means they're committing a crime. And often when they're committing a crime, there's a victim. And so nobody benefits when we have a system designed that traps people and keeps them from moving ahead. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, I mean, my brain is just exploding here. There's just been, so much. I want to pivot to talk a little bit about issue 1, but before we do, I just want to say that, from my perspective, whenever we're looking at disparities, and we see disparities in the data, right? This is really hard fact that we're looking at. We have to be able to do the translation in our brain to really recognize that what we are looking at is the impact of racism. The disparity is the measure of racism on a system. And that's what we are looking at, plain and simple. When you step back through history, you begin to see how America pivoted from slavery into incarceration. And we have certainly reached the pinnacle of incarceration with Black and brown individuals today. But at the core, every time we are looking at disproportionality in terms of sentencing, bail bonds, the overcrowding, the low-level offenses, the offenses of, drug, what we are looking at is that historical and real-time impact of racism on the system. And so you've got to be able to do that translation. And as you begin to think about what anti-racist behaviors and practices and policies do we need to lift up, the SB, the Senate Bill 3, and of course issue 1, which we're going to talk about, as Bashira has so eloquently said, directionally is pointing us in the area that we need to be able to go. And so I just had to say that the criminal justice system, the jail system, and the prison system every day is a real-time reality of the ongoing racism that we experience, in America. America, our criminal justice system is head and shoulders, internationally, we're one of the most incarcerated, countries in the world. So I'm going to get off my soapbox there and just pivot us to issue 1. If you could just give us a little bit of background on issue 1. Was it 2 or 3 years ago? Where are we now? It felt like maybe we weren't we didn't quite have the mind share, but where is it? How can we get it back going? And what would that look like? How could we make it even more robust and stronger? So what was it? What is it? Where are we? And how do we move it forward?
Yes, I'll kick off. Issue 1 was, I'll say, a collection of policy interventions that would have together were a constitutional amendment in 2018 to reduce the prison population, provide cost savings to the state, and to mandate a redirection of those cost savings back to our communities for services. And so specifically the 4 pillars were the reclassification of low-level drug possession felonies to misdemeanors, which Senate Bill 3 is an outgrowth of that piece of issue 1. The eliminating the ability of judges to reincarcerate someone for only probation violations. So that doesn't apply if someone reoffends new crime, just a violation of their probation. So let's say they didn't show up for a meeting. And if you are on probation and you violate your probation, you can be sent back to prison. So that's why that particular piece was included. Increase earned time credit. So let's say you're participating in programming while you're incarcerated, which we can get into why programming while incarcerated is so important. But many prisons, maybe not all across the board, but some of them do offer vocational training, GED, post-secondary education, addiction-related treatment, all sorts of programming. If you're participating in those, you can earn time off of your sentence. And then the last piece is that potential cost savings would go into drug treatment programs, other community needs relevant to the intent of this ballot initiative, and also services for victims of crime. And about 15% of the cost savings would have gone to serving victims of crime. So that's a mouthful. You can't exactly explain issue 1 in a 30-second elevator pitch. So that was one of the challenges, is that although issue 1 is a reflection of best practice policy across the country. And I can share, offline as a follow-up, some of the practices that have been adopted by other communities that are similar to elements of issue 1 and how they've actually worked out pretty well. So all the fears that people had around issue 1 are debunked in other communities. But it's still a mouthful, it's still hard to explain, and it was also a constitutional amendment. And I found in the different communities that I was campaigning in, that people had that as a hang up, it being a constitutional amendment. Although with all things policy, there's always a workaround. And so I think that issue could have been addressed, but it still was hard to explain. And so where we are now is issue 1 was in 2018. Obviously it didn't pass. Most of the advocates that were working on the campaign still communicate and still work together because we realize we need to do some more base building, and that we still believe issue 1 would have done way more good than harm. And so how do we find other ways, other avenues to be able to push for this kind of policy? This particular route didn't work out. And part of the reason why advocates were pushing at the time that they did was because of the opiate epidemic. And there was a rise in individuals in jail and those who are incarcerated for drug-related offenses. So there was a policy window. There was an opportunity where we were hoping individuals see this as a priority. Now, as we move forward, I believe that there is going to be another policy window. We know that around the country, communities are grappling with the legalization of marijuana. And as communities explore that and inch closer to either decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana, I believe there will be another policy window to be able to talk about these kinds of policies again, because just like with Senate Bill 3, right now, Senate Bill 3 doesn't benefit anyone that Towards Employment serves who has already served their time for a drug-related offense, because they've already served their time. But someone with a similar offense who had, a similar amount that they were arrested for will end up having a misdemeanor. I happen to think that's a good thing, but there's a disparity in some individuals are going to be living with one type of offense that has fewer collateral sanctions tied to it, and there are others that have already served their time that will then be living with a different offense that has many collateral sanctions tied to it. So I do believe there's another opportunity for us to have these kinds of discussions and the kind of momentum. And our charge is, how do we make sure, we don't know quite when that moment will come, but how do we make sure we're ready for it?
Right. Yeah, these are really, complex issues. And I think, the readiness is what is so key, because we are going to have another opportunity to come at this again. And, the decriminalization of marijuana is certainly, it is a train that is, on the tracks. And I know Columbus has done some decriminalization. Cleveland, the city of Cleveland has done some decriminalization. But, I expect to see that, as I'm sure you do, at a state level as well. So it is really on its way. I have shared with so many that, last Friday I had an opportunity, along with a whole lot of people, to have dinner by Zoom with Angela Davis, who is someone that I met when I was 14 years old. And I met her because my uncle was part of the legal team in North Carolina working on the Joanne Little trial. And Joanne Little was a young woman who'd been arrested, she was arrested for, like driving while black in North Carolina. And while she was in jail, the jailer attempted to rape her, and she picked up an ice pick. This is 1974, and stabbed him. He did die of his wounds. And so there was a trial, and it was, amazing to see. I was at the trial. I was in North Carolina spending that summer. with family. Grew up in California, and everybody came through that trial, Julian Bond and Angela Davis. And so last week, she talked really about abolishing the prison system. And, you know, while that may not be in the cards for us in my lifetime, what it did was cast vision around what it might be to really do some bold moves to have significant decriminalization of our prison and jail systems in the United States, and how you would redeploy resources to invest in education and housing and workforce and employment. You really have to have a very different system in order for that to, you know, be viable. And so it was it was a, you know, mind expanding, you know, opportunity to hear her talk, and to hear her talk about just sort of, you know, the history of the movement, and how coalition building, you know, happened, and how you take advantage of moments in history to be able to expose and deliver on what is happening, you know, strategically behind the scenes. And so this is an amazing job. And this webinar, you know, we are the willing. And so what does it look like? What will it look like? What do we need to be doing? You know, when our own senators and representatives at a state level are for this bill, how do we reach out and connect with those that are not for this bill, and do it in a powerful, civic, and engaged way to be able to begin to bring pressure and reality around opposing viewpoints so that we can be successful?
Yeah, so I think there are sort of several things that you can do, and I tell everybody, like, everybody has their own lane, right? Like, if you're not the policy person, like, you don't have to write the 15-page report and do all of the research, and if you're not a person that wants to knock on doors, you don't have to go do that either. So I think there is a sort of understanding yourself first, where you are and what your strengths are, and then figuring out which group or sort of which piece of the puzzle you want to connect to. So like sometimes the most important person at an event or in a movement is the person who brings the food, right? Like that might be you. So I think it's just sort of internally sort of recognizing, what am I good at? What do I care about? And who am I connected to? If you are super connected with the PTA at your kid's school, then maybe that might be a good place to bring some sandwiches and talk to them about something like that. So I think sort of picking your spots, talking to people that are close to you, talking to people that know you and trust you, is a sort of a good way to convey that message. And we have a lot of work to do. And I think we have, you know, I was out in, I think, Morrow County getting signatures for issue 1, and talking to folks who, some were for it, some were against it, but had some really good conversations that I think they may not at that point have changed their mind, but I think just having that conversation and putting it front and center sort of is really important. On the sort of action-oriented side, so the Ohio Organizing Collaborative was one of the partners in issue 1, and we work with them on other things as well. And so they sort of have, like right now they have a tool where if your loved one is incarcerated and you want to share a story about what's going on the inside, you can do short story sharing. So for some legislators, seeing a real person and hearing their story and hearing their families, like that's what moves them.
How do you access that storytelling? I love that. That is really,
I can put a link in there. I will do that. I will make sure that I do that. So I think, storytelling is one of those things, reaching out to your neighbors. And then there's also just the traditional writing your legislator.
Mhm.
I know it feels like it doesn't matter, but it absolutely does matter. Write them, call them, email them. They do listen and they do read those things. And then also just being supportive or giving testimony down at the state house are some ways that folks can get involved. And Bashira, if you want to add a few other things.
Yes, so I'd have to agree with Jasmine. I think it's the volume of individuals actually saying the same thing over and over again that
Mhm.
makes a difference. So you're right, one person raising an issue may or may not necessarily making a difference. If everyone has that attitude and no one says anything, then it gives the impression that the issue is not important. But
Right.
if lots of people are saying the same thing, that this matters to us, then that's when you start seeing your elected officials, they become activated to better understand the issue and to better to work on these issues. I'd say another organization that also was supportive of the Issue One campaign, Ohio Organizing Collaborative and the Ohio Justice Policy Center, were kind of the two lead architects of Issue One. And can still continue to do a lot of advocacy. Another organization is the ACLU, particularly around bail reform and the decarceration effort right now. The ACLU has been very active, and they also are collecting stories about individuals who are currently incarcerated and what their experience is with the coronavirus and whether or not the prisons are safe facilities. And so that's another avenue of a group that does bring people together to do advocacy related work. And they do a very good job of constantly communicating, explaining their positions. So that would be another organization. Story collection, I hate to say that legislation is sometimes made by anecdote, but you touch an elected official, you bring someone that touches their heart, and then all of a sudden you see them becoming a real advocate. So the combination of raising awareness, the story collection, and showing the impact, I think makes a difference. And then I think another key advocacy element is when businesses get involved. And so one of the things that we always think about, how is this going to impact the business community? And someone had a question in the chat about ban the box, which can sometimes be a controversial issue, and we can get into how the multiple sides of ban the box and why it's still a very important tool. But thinking about what is the business argument for a particular criminal justice issue, I think the Policy Matters Ohio federal sanctions, for instance, great tool
I love all these
because it
tools
talks
that
about
are,
we're impacting the kid. And I did post link. Say that again.
I love all these tools that you are sharing. Please post them and share them in the chat. These are really, really wonderful. I do think that stories are incredibly impactful. They are impactful for neighbor to neighbor, at PTA, in our faith groups. Stories are how we share information. And so I love that. I think stories are also how we share fear. When I think back to fear and the criminal justice system, I believe that fear is the basis for our criminal justice system in the United States. And you can go back to Birth of a Nation and see how that film was used effectively to build upon fear around Blacks, particularly Black men, that we still, see today. So fear is a very powerful tool, and storytelling is a powerful tool that is used by sort of both sides, if you will. And so we've got to be able to be effective in our storytelling. You touched a little bit on ban the box, and there was also a question about transparency in sentencing. So who can sort of walk us through what's happening there?
I'm happy to jump in around ban the box.
Yeah.
So there has been some movement around ban the box. So, we're the YWCA is located in Cleveland. So I can say that the city of Cleveland has a ban the box ordinance that was passed in 2011. And it basically just removes the checkbox on city job and civil service testing applications on whether the applicant has a felony conviction. And for those of you who are not familiar, Ban the Box is a national movement. The National Employment Law Project has done the most writing about fair hiring and Ban the Box. So that's a place that you would want to go to if you're interested in more information. But it basically says we're going to remove the box that says, have you ever been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor off the job application? That does not mean you don't do a criminal background check. Employers are going to do criminal background checks. So that's a non-negotiable. Particularly certain employers have to do them because of the nature of the work that they do. But the idea is that if you remove the box, it gives individuals who have a record to be able to show who they are before their record becomes a part of the decision-making on whether you would hire them or not. The county has also adopted a ban the box ordinance that was in 2012. And then the state of Ohio under Governor Kasich was able to do some changes as well. So there was the Ohio Fair Hiring Act, which removes the box, and that applies to all local government jobs in the state. And that's a significant number of jobs. It's about 684,000 jobs that where the box has been removed from that particular kind of job application. And then he also had an administrative order that applies to jobs within Ohio state government. You'll notice none of these apply to private employers or employers that contract with local, county, or state government. And so there was a bill introduced in the State House in the last, I believe, couple weeks or the last few months that would make ban the box something that applied to private employers. The challenge is it's very difficult to move that forward. The best ordinance I've seen is the city of Boston, where their ordinance says that anyone who contracts with the city of Boston for contracts over a certain amount would also have to ban the box. The reason why it's controversial is employers still have to do a background check. And so oftentimes people misunderstand what ban the box does. It's really more moving the box. It's moving when you ask that question. We know that part of the reason why you want to have ban the box is that there's some racial disparities tied to individuals being screened out, assuming that if you have a criminal record, you're more than likely brown or black, which we know that brown and black people are disproportionately arrested, charged, and convicted. So it's not a crazy assumption, but it means that you're screening people out based on their race, which, by the way, is illegal. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission at the federal level prohibits that kind of discrimination. And because brown and black people are disproportionately charged and convicted, they are also considered a protected class. At the same time, they're finding that now employers, there's been a few studies, I'm not saying that I agree with those studies, that have said that employers are now finding other ways to screen out brown and black people, and that ban the box has had the opposite effect. The National Employment Law Project would say it is only highlighting that employers still find ways, not all employers, some employers still find ways to screen out brown and black people. And now that the criminal conviction isn't the tool that they're using, they have just found another one. But that doesn't mean ban the box didn't actually serve a positive purpose, which is really highlighting that racism is still an issue.
Racism is still an issue, And we have really come to we're coming to the end of our hour. And I wanted to say that if you have been outraged in the past couple of weeks watching and tracking the horrific story of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and you are outraged and horrified, I want you to be able to take action by telling that story around what we can be doing to start getting our criminal justice system moving in a positive direction. There are actions that we can take, and we've talked about several of them today. And that's what we've got to be able to do, with our outrage that we have. The criminal justice system in the United States is incredibly racist. We have African Americans, we are under assault. And this has been going on. This is not a new thing. This has been going on for centuries. I had an opportunity earlier this year to visit the National Legacy Museum, also more commonly referred to as the Lynching Museum that Ben Stevenson has built in Alabama. And it is moving, haunting, and a powerful, powerful legacy of the murder, dragging, burning, beating, lynching, raping of Blacks in America. And there's so much for us to be able to continue to understand about criminal justice and what we can do. I just want to thank you, Jasmine, for your work that you do in the state of Ohio every single day. Policy Matters is a very important organization. I hope you all will remember them in your giving and look to them as an incredible resource that's happening in the state related to criminal justice reform and so many other amazing topics. They really are on the forefront of helping us to understand issues and pulling issues forward in terms of actions and practices and policies that will make a difference for working individuals in Ohio. This is an organization that is for the people, and just an incredible resource. I know they've shared so much. Jasmine shared quite a bit in the chat, but please go to Policy Matters, check them out, and remember them in their giving. Towards Employment, Bashir Addison, thank you so much for joining us. I so am just love always hearing you talk and share your insights. And Towards Employment is doing amazing work, transformative work, really changing the lives of individuals who are formerly incarcerated. That's so much of where your expertise lies. I know Jill has been on this webinar. Say hi to Jill. And I really am in awe of everything that you are doing for people. And all of these things that we have talked about today really will enhance your ability to support individuals going forward. Keep up the good fight, my sister. You're doing incredible work, Bashira. And I'm just so thrilled to have both you and Jasmine on the call today. I hope you all will remember the YWCA in your giving. You can text to give today. And this concludes our series of 4 in which we've looked at voting and the census, public health, education, and now criminal justice. We're going to continue to have these conversations and talk about these issues. And we are also going to come again with another series, and tentatively we're going to be exploring whiteness. So look for that on our next Go Live series. We're going to take a little break for a while, but we will be back. We've loved having you here with us. Thank you all for joining us. It's been amazing, and have a great weekend and a safe weekend. Thank you all. Bye-bye.